Recognized by the U.S. Supreme Court as a scholarly authority on game fixing in sports, Brian Tuohy is the author of highly controversial sports books, The Fix Is In, The Showbiz Manipulations of the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, and NASCAR, Larceny Games, Sports Gambling, Game Fixing, and the FBI, A Season in the Abyss, Sports Gambling versus the NFL's Integrity, and his most recent, The Fix Is Still In, More Corruption and Conspiracies the Pro Sports Leagues Don't Want You to Know About. Tuohy has appeared on over 200 radio programs and podcasts across the U.S. and Canada, including the nationally syndicated programs The Dan Patrick Show, Coast to Coast AM, Fox Sports Chris Myers Interviews, JT the Brick, The Brian Kinney Show on NBC Sports Radio, and The Alex Jones Show. Some of Tuohy's other sports-related writing can be found in Sports Illustrated, at Vice Sports, and Sports on Earth, as well as his popular website, thefixisn.net, which I'll share with you guys later in this episode. Thanks again, Brian, for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. I guess the most obvious start, considering we're a week away from Super Bowl 56, is Super Bowl 56. As I was telling you right before we started recording, I listened to your most recent podcast, and you nailed it. You said you wouldn't be surprised if Burrow beat the Chiefs because the NFL is looking to basically groom or bring in a new crop of quarterbacks now that Roethlisberger, Rivers, Rodgers is about to be gone, Brady's retiring. Basically, that entire class, both of the Mannings are gone now, so they need more than just Mahomes, so exactly. That was a win-win for the league. Whereas the Rams versus the Niners, you were like, I'm pretty sure the Rams are going to take that. The Niners don't have enough star power. And something that I picked up on, 54 years, the NFL never had a team make the Super Bowl that was the host of the Super Bowl. And COVID hit, and all of a sudden, 2 for 2. Tampa Bay is in the Super Bowl, and Los Angeles is in the Super Bowl. What a coincidence. I know James is a fan of coincidences.
Aren't we all?
My favorite saying. What a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's amazing because, again, one of the things I write about in my books and on my website is I don't believe in coincidences, not when you have billions of dollars attached to them. And I mean, that's what a lot of sports fans, regardless if it's the NFL, NBA, NHL, whatever, I think they seem to fail to recognize the fact that these are multi-billion-dollar businesses. And not only that, but their business is not sports. Their business is really entertainment. Their business is show business. And that opens it up to a lot of other things that you don't think of in sports, because I think as sports fans, a lot of people kind of project themselves into those roles, either as the coach or one of the players. And they think, well, if I manage to live that dream and here I am playing for the NFL and here I am playing in the Super Bowl, I would live up to all the cliches and, take it to the next level and give 110% and blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, for a lot of these guys, this is just a job. And because it's just a job, some days you don't care about your job. Some days you don't try very hard at your job. You just want to get through your job to get on to things you have going on at home. And that's the same thing with sports athletes. I mean, they sometimes don't care. And sometimes they're motivated to do things that may be not in the best interest of the team and in their own best interest, or, again, they just want to get out of there. They want to be done with it. They don't want to be in the playoffs because they want to get home to their kids and their wife or whatever. And that's something a lot of sports fans don't consider.
So I feel like I'm a little overqualified because I've read all of your stuff. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. So
I feel bad for you, man. That's a lot.
Not all of your podcasts. Don't get me wrong. A lot of your podcasts, and I have read 2 of your books. I'm into this stuff because I was a sports nerd growing up, and
same here.
Just a numbers guy in general. So when you bring the money factor into it, this topic is something that I'm really fascinated by. So if people want to hear about your books and more of the other stuff that you talk about on the regular, they can go listen to other podcasts. I kind of want to push it to the next level and ask some questions that, even people that have read your books and people who know your stuff might be interested in hearing. One is that, you talk about how these leagues are collectives basically, and, they operate, each owner is basically it's a collective. I can't think of maybe the proper way to articulate that at this time. But my question was, since 80% of the profit is shared in the NFL, what is it that makes certain organizations more valuable than others, given that the league is operating as a whole?
Like you said, the NFL revenue, nobody really seems to know exactly how much revenue is shared in the NFL. 80% is kind of an approximation that everybody makes. And the vast majority of that is the television money, because you got to remember the NFL is getting, I forget what it is now. It's like over $7 billion a year from Fox, ESPN, and the rest of them to broadcast their games. The other money that's not shared is usually directly related to the stadium. It's the stuff that like the luxury suites, that money is not shared. But even, things that people don't think about is like merchandise sales are shared. So if you buy something like in the team's official pro shop, that isn't shared. But if you go on NFL.com, for example, and you buy a Bears hat, well, some of that money goes to the Packers. If you buy a Rams hat, some of that money goes to the Jets. All of that money is shared as well. So they have a large incentive to really just sell as much as they can, because everybody's making money off of this stuff. So I think what happens is, when a team goes 16-0, now 17-0, and a team goes, 0-17, the teams make the same amount of money. So it behooves, I think, in my opinion, the league to push certain storylines. And if, it does the league good to have the Patriots keep winning Super Bowls with Tom Brady, well, then they're going to do that. And, the Lions may be willing to lose games. The Bills may be willing to lose games because they're going to make money, because Tom Brady's going to lose Super Bowl, and more people are going to make money. More people are going to buy their merchandise, and the NFL is going to make more money, and that's going to be spread around to everybody. In terms of the value, it's interesting. I don't totally understand like why the Cowboys are worth supposedly whatever it is, $5 billion or whatever franchises. I don't quite understand it. A lot of it is just name brand and recognition. The Cowboys are America's team, and for whatever reason, a lot of people out there are Cowboys fans. And so I think that bumps up the supposed value of the franchise. But again, that's estimated and guessed at, I think, because Jerry Jones isn't selling the team tomorrow. So we really don't know how much that franchise is really worth. So it's really more about the league, I think, making money and the projected idea of how much these, franchises are worth. And it's probably done in many ways for them to get loans and make, money off the money that they have supposedly invested in the team, because like the Bidwells have owned the Cardinals since the 1930s. The Hallises have owned the Bears since the league began. Some of these guys are legacies. The Maras with the Giants, they're legacy teams. So really, they don't have any money invested in these teams. But if their franchise is valued at $3 billion, well, then that gives them a lot of leverage with banks and things like that, I think.
Right. I see.
Makes sense.
Right. Well, a question kind of in the same ballpark, but maybe stepping it from macro to micro. As far as players, I mean, I guess this is kind of two questions in one, but it's like, to what degree are these games rigged? And then when you consider it, to me, it seems like they're more and more rigged with each season. I don't remember when I was a kid, it didn't seem as produced as it does today. But anyhow,
I almost wonder if it's because we could be more aware
Bingo.
in certain instances for what we're seeing, kind of what we're intrigued by when it comes back to peeling back that onion. I wonder if that could have something to do with it, Brian.
I think that does have a lot to do with it. I think as the older you get, most people naturally get more cynical. I think that's kind of built in. So I think, if you're not, like we were talking actually before the show started, if you're not a hardcore, die-hard fan of a certain team or a certain league, as you get older, it becomes kind of less meaningful to you. And you still may watch and you still may participate, even go to games or what have you. But I think when you kind of take your fan hat off and look at these things from a distance and look at them more from the outside looking in, then this kind of manipulation that I talk about that occurs in these sporting events, I think becomes more clear. And when you add in like the fact you start realizing as an adult, the NFL isn't just something. The NFL is a multi-billion-dollar business, as opposed to when you're a kid, you're just like, well, it's football, great. Then you start recognizing the patterns and you start questioning the supposed coincidences that help benefit the league, help benefit NBC and ESPN and everybody else who's broadcasting and all. And so I think it becomes more apparent from that perspective. As far as players being involved, that's the $1 million question here for me, because, I could be wrong. I could be wrong 99% of the time when I say, well, I think this game was fixed or this game was fixed or this game was manipulated or what have you. But even if I'm right just the one time, it kills the integrity of the entire league. Because if just one time the NFL said, okay, we're going to make sure team X beats team Y, and we're going to do everything we can to make that happen, then you've killed your integrity because it's not what you purport it to be. With players, I think you can get to players in many ways. I mean, organized crime has taught us over the years, the way to get to people is to find their weaknesses. Whether a person has a drug problem, a gambling problem, just a problem with their wife or girlfriend, some family issue, whatever. The NFL is aware of all this stuff just as well. So if a player, for example, like tests positive for steroids, I think the NFL could very easily go to that player if they need to or wanted to and say, look, do you want us to out you as a steroid user, suspend you for 4 games, and now you have that cloud over your head all the time? Or do you want us to make this positive test go away and go out there and do something for us tomorrow? Which do you want to do? Take your pick. And I mean, that's nothing that's written down. That's nothing the player 10 years from now can come out and really say, oh, well, the NFL told me to do this, because you have no proof that the NFL told you to do this. But it's a very easy way to get to a player, get him to manipulate the game. And then once you've done that to him once, then you kind of have him in your back pocket. And if you need to go back and tap him on the shoulder again, you go, hey, remember last time? And I think that's the sort of thing that can happen very easily.
Yeah, I gotcha. What I guess where I was aiming that was like, if all of the performance is tainted, I guess not all of it, but even if some of it's tainted, how do you determine which players are going to get paid more than others? If you see where I'm going, like if
you mean why does Peyton Manning get what he got as opposed to Kirk Cousins or something like that?
Or even like offensive linemen that say they play on a team like the Lions, but they're really good, or like Ndamukong Suh is a good example. It's like, how come he was valued so much more and got to go to the Dolphins or wherever he ended up going versus some other defensive end on the Lions that's pretty good, but they're on the Lions, so because those games are manipulated for them to lose most of the time, he's looking worse than if that same guy played for the Steelers.
I think what it comes down to is talent is still necessary. And I think that's why, because I get asked a lot of times, why haven't the Lions won the Super Bowl, or why haven't the Browns won the Super Bowl? Why have they been bad for 50 years? And I think part of it is talent, because you can't fake that. You can't take a player who's not good, maybe for a game. You can hide him for a game. I mean, I think they hid Tim Tebow for about 8 games with the Broncos. He wasn't good, but they were able to make him look good enough and make the Broncos win those games that got him into the playoffs to hide that. But they couldn't do it for a career. So they jettisoned that guy and let him go. But talent matters. So, I think that's why the draft is a real thing, because you are trying to find that talent, and only certain people can excel at that level that is required for professional sports, whether it's basketball, football, baseball, what have you. You have to have talent. You can't fake a guy hitting home runs. You can't fake a guy throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastball. You just can't. So talent does matter. And what I think happens is the NFL will find, especially with quarterbacks, like you talked about earlier, and star quarterbacks are what drive ratings for the NFL. So you need that. You can't fake Aaron Rodgers' talent, but once you see it emerge, well, then you can help it. You know what I mean? Then you could say, okay, here's his offensive line. They're committing holding on every 5th play, but you know what? We're going to tell our officials, don't call it, because we want him protected. And if he's protected more and they have less offensive holding calls against them, well, guess what? He's going to do better, and his stats are going to be better. And guess what? The team's going to win. And that's going to be a game that's really manipulated, even though it's not necessarily manipulated by the league to make sure the Packers win. That game is manipulated to help Rodgers do well because he's one of our stars and we want him to succeed. But by effect, that helps that team win. And you see that, I think, in the NBA all the time. When you have certain players, like, you can't guard them the way you guard other players because you breathe on them wrong, you get called for the foul and they get sent to the line. Well, that's all it takes. If you create bubbles around certain star athletes, they're going to succeed because they do have that talent already, and that team's going to win more, which is great for the leagues. Again, those players wind up in the playoffs and those players wind up becoming superstars. It all falls into line. So you don't necessarily have to get all 11 guys on the offense of a team to be in on the fix. You may not need any of them, but you got the officials who are helping them out, and that's all it takes.
I feel a lot of fans, we and a lot of fans say that a lot. When you start to see it from that perspective, you can almost see it too and feel it through the flow of the game, through refs, through certain calls, through the inconsistencies of it. And it's really intriguing kind of seeing that play out. And to piggyback off of what G were saying, it seems like you're starting to see that a lot more, Brian. I mean, I know you touched on this, but is that really more of a psychological thing in getting older, or are we seeing that, or are
it feels like
folks...
even since I've picked up on it, it's increased though.
Well, the NFL like this year was insane with games that came down to the final like 2 minutes, final drive or final play.
Right.
And I don't think I've seen it like that recently. I mean, some guy
standings
13-second game winners, with Pat there at the end. I mean, this is stuff we did, unprecedented stuff.
Exactly. And somebody who follows me on Twitter was kind of like tracking it throughout the course of the season. I think he wound up with, and I'm going to get the stat wrong, but I think he said something like around like 45% of games wound up being decided like in the final 2 minutes.
Right.
Which is insane. I mean, it's like NBA, A lot of times people would say, well, you don't need to tune into the NBA until the final 2 minutes to see who's going to win or lose the game. The rest of it didn't matter. Well, that's what's happened suddenly with the NFL is it seems like it's come down to the final thing. I mean, the last 6 playoff games we've had, the 4 divisional games and the 2 conference championship games were all decided. The 4 divisional rounds on the final play, literally on the final play, were decided. And the conference champions were both decided. What, it was a final field goal, and the Rams gave the ball back to the 49ers, who had a chance to win it on the final play, but failed. So, I mean, it all came down to the final 2 minutes again. And like I said, I mean, that could be a happy accident for the NFL. But again, I think if you look at it more cynically and logically, it's kind of impossible. I mean, if it was, and now you're going to say, well, how did they do it? I don't know. I don't know how the magicians do their tricks either, but I know they're tricks. I know they're tricking me.
Very true.
At the same time, I know the guy didn't make the lady on stage. He didn't really cut her in half.
Right.
It's kind of the same with the NFL. I know that maybe one game came down to the final play, or one game came down to the final drive, but 6 in a row.
And that sort of segues into something maybe a little deeper there, Brian, because I mean, I know we have the referees there, and I know we have a lot of other things that could potentially dictate those things, but that's what I want to get into is like what could be some of those other things that are potentially used to
coaching.
Say that again.
Coaching. I think coaching plays a big role because just think about it, because I'm not sure how much really players are totally involved in this. I mean, I think more often, like I said, I think players can be tapped, and I think players have been gotten to, and players, like Peyton Manning, I think was like the legitimate NFL company guy who they said, Peyton, we need you to throw game X, but we'll reward you with game Y. And Peyton did that throughout his whole career. I mean, that's my opinion. Now, can I prove that? Not necessarily. No,
of course.
But I mean, that's kind of the way I see it. But with coaching, I mean, you just think about it, again, in these last couple of games, like the Chiefs-Bills game, you had 13 seconds left and you kicked off out of the end zone and didn't take up any of those final 13 seconds when you knew Kansas City had all 3 timeouts and all they need is a field goal to tie the game. That's an incredibly dumb coaching decision.
Right. And
it altered really the outcome of the game because had they squib kicked it, odds are it wouldn't have turned out the way it turned out. But at the same time, like in the Rams game against the Buccaneers, somebody let Cooper Kupp run down the middle of the field wide open for 50 yards and just had some slow safety covering up. Well, who do you think the Rams are going to throw to now? I mean, It's the end of the game. Cooper Kupp's got 2,000 yards. He's most receiving yards in NFL history for a season. And you're not going to double cover the guy when it comes down to, game breaking moments. You're just going to let him run wide open down the middle of the field. I mean, coaching can put players in bad positions and create bad matchups intentionally. Absolutely. And yet it does get questioned sometimes by the media, but a lot of times it's just let go and nobody cares about it. But again, these are game-changing things, which, I think armchair quarterback guys sitting at home see and wonder, what were these dudes thinking? I mean, we're told these are football geniuses,
right?
And yet they do some of the dumbest things imaginable and get away with it. And then not only that, they can lose their job and get rehired somewhere else and do it again and keep getting rehired all over the place.
And there's a lot of nepotism in NFL.
Exactly.
We talk about that all the time. We also talk about that armchair guy that you're talking about. But there are some folks, even in my family and that are close to our circle that knows football. And when you know football and you understand football, you sort of know what you're seeing. And it's easy to sort of say, oh, look at that guy who's never played or who's played but not playing now, go after the coaching or go after the coaches. What do you know? But sometimes you can just see it.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to touch on, because I was thinking about it when y'all were talking about the officials, is like, especially in the last 10, 15 years, technology could take over all officiating. Why, if they're really about the integrity of the game, why are they still measuring first downs with a chain instead of a laser?
2 guys in a chain.
Absolutely.
Multi-billion-dollar company, of course, making big decisions.
Well, and that's why I think, again, it's part of its manipulation. It has to be. Because like you said, how much would it really cost the NFL to put in these, changes to the game and the way it's officiated with technology? How much would it really cost them? I mean, like a dime, basically.
I mean, the MLB,
to measure it first down, you have to have 2 guys with chains to figure it out. You're telling me there's not a technology advancement that can do that for you and do it really almost precisely without any issues whatsoever. And again, how much would it really cost them? I mean, Major League Baseball supposedly is going to slowly implement the robot umpires, but they still haven't done it.
And that I'm wearing this hat because it's an umpire hat, and it blows my mind. I'm a baseball guy, so it blows my mind when I'm watching the World Series and they have the K zone interface on the screen. It's like, if they have that on the screen, why can't the umpire just have a little earpiece and a guy is in
a buzzer?
Strike or ball from the K zone. It's not that hard.
No, because I mean, you can't have a guy. You can't probably technologically speaking figure out, like, if there's a play at the plate, whether a guy was safe or out.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, you need a guy standing there. So I mean, certain things you have to have officials for. But again, with the NFL, they kind of started implementing this eye in the sky thing too this year. But again, you still have to have instant replay, being called by coaches. Why?
Right.
Why are certain plays automatically reviewed and, ruled upon instantly, like, oh no, that wasn't the fumble. We know right away. And here we go. And other plays, well, the coach has to throw the challenge flag to figure out what really happened on this play. Why don't they have 3 guys watching TV for the NFL who can just, same thing, buzzer in and say, hey, look, there was a fumble. They recovered it. The ball's on the 40-yard line. Let's go. Instead of having these long, drawn-out 5-minute explanations and figure out what the hell happened here, there, and everywhere. And at the same time, what I always wondered is, why can't we hear them talking about this stuff?
Very true.
Because I think that would be fascinating for fans.
It would.
If you could have the replay roll and seeing what the officials are seeing, and then hear them talking supposedly about the rules and how we're going to decide what happened, would be great television. But nope, that's all secret. Can't know about that because who knows what they're really talking about.
Right. Say it all the time. They're talking about bringing folks inside the game and making things more accessible. That's definitely a one way to do that. But I think that will, shed light on too much there.
Well, that's the scary part. Because that's the only reason that makes sense why you can't hear it.
Why you wouldn't, right?
Yeah, because they must not necessarily be talking about what you think they're supposed to be talking about.
Right. Do you feel like, for the most part, players and organizations are striving to win and there's a top-down mechanism? Okay, so you do think that it's...
Well, we just saw, right? Brian Flores. Brian Flores just came out and said, I mean, now, I don't know if he's being honest, but I think he's being honest. He said the Miami Dolphins owner, Ross, told me that I'd get $100,000 per loss. That doesn't sound like a team that wants to win.
That's going to be a domino effect too.
Of course.
That's going to be a domino effect there. It's already slowly starting, but it's going to start to churn up, I think, as more.
Okay, I should refine my question, because the argument there would be, okay, the guy wants to tank to get better draft picks because they're trying to win long term.
But people need to stop right there, because this has been going on in the NBA since the 1980s. We know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For draft picks.
Yeah.
And what I've argued is that is the very definition of a fixed game. If people don't think games are being fixed, you look at the NBA and game tanking and tell me how those are not fixed games. You literally have ownership, whether it's the owner himself or the general manager, telling the coaches and the players, we don't care. We don't want to win. We'd rather lose. because we're getting better draft picks. So now you're saying that a significant portion of NBA season play, I mean, we're talking 10, 20 games from multiple teams, don't matter. And they're officially trying to go out there and lose. Those are fixed games. And there's nothing, and they still charge full price for the tickets, still charge full price for the beers, for the parking, for the t-shirts, for everything else. And yet you're saying this is a legitimate competition. But it's clearly not. It's clearly being fixed. And even Mark Cuban went on the Dan Patrick show and said, I took my team out to dinner and I told them it's in our best interest to lose. And yet he got fined for making that comment because he made it publicly. He didn't lose ownership of his team. He was telling his team to lose. Right. He was going out there fixing NBA games nobody cared about. People were still betting on him. I mean, that's the very definition of what I'm talking about here. I mean, it's basically proven in NBA game tanking. And now we know for sure pretty much that it's going on in the NFL too. It's likely gone on in the NHL because draft picks matter there too. So there's 3 of the 4 major sports in the United States that we know games are being fixed in by ownership to make sure that supposedly they get a better draft pick.
And for as far as Flores is concerned, if you think back to when he was apparently asked to do that, they were already finding him and the GM were already finding strategic ways to garner more draft picks without even necessarily having to do that. You know, they were trading certain players, making moves, stacking up draft picks. I remember, Fitzpatrick. The year after that, I'm pretty sure they had established quite a few draft. If I'm not mistaken, the next 2 or 3 years that Flores was there, they had accumulated a lot of draft picks from doing it the right way without even having to lose on purpose per se. So it's interesting looking at that because there is a strategy on, potentially building your team the right way. And if losing is a result of getting younger and giving away overpriced players, okay, but to lose on purpose brings a whole nother light to the situation. And I think it's going to be a domino effect moving forward, to be honest, of folks coming out and talking about that.
Well, that's the thing. Will anybody really talk about it? And if they talk about it, will anybody cover it? That's the other thing.
It's another point,
because I've encountered that. Trust me, with my career,
Very
some
true.
people promise to say one thing and then that never happens and just disappears. That's the great thing about the media. If it's not on ESPN, if it's not in Sports Illustrated, it happens in the world of sports. Does it really happen?
Right.
That's the big thing.
Very good point. I was going to ask you about that too, Brian. I mean, I know you had a great interview on Dan Patrick's show and shows like that. When you go on these mainstream media platforms, how are you balancing, I'm sure what you really want to dig into and peel back on, but also realizing I'm on a platform where I want to continue to be on these platforms to speak on these topics, but maybe not go too far to have, mainstream sort of look at me a certain way.
Well, I already had my reputation kind of, wrecked. I don't know if that's the right term, but
blackballed.
Well, yeah, blackballed is really what I mean. And it sounds stupid, but I mean, I'll make a long story really short. I wrote this book called Larceny Games, which is based on all this FBI information I accumulated through the Freedom of Information Act. Okay.
All right.
And in that book, I talked about straight out of the files. I didn't make it up, but they named at least, I forget what it was, like 4 NFL Hall of Fame players who had bet on their own games that the FBI knew about, and like at least 3 NBA Hall of Famers that had bet on their own games that they knew about. And I named them all in the book because I could figure it out from the FBI files. It's no big deal. So my publisher got contacted by ESPN, Yahoo Sports, HBO Sports. Everybody wanted a copy of the book ahead of time. I had, meetings with producers from 60 Minutes, and Sports Illustrated said they were going to run an excerpt from my book in their magazine. And then nobody did anything. They all made it disappear. No, I mean, nobody wrote a review of the book that said, boy, this book's terrible. Nobody wrote a review that said it's great. It's just like they all looked at it, saw what I had, and said, nope, we're not touching that, and made it disappear. Now, again, I didn't make the stuff up. Right. I wasn't accusing, like Len Dawson of fixing games. I was saying, look, this is exactly what the FBI knew. And yeah, it really seemed like Len Dawson definitely had bet on the Chiefs and probably fixed games to ensure he won those bets. But I wasn't, making it up. And yet the sports media all shunned it. They all made it go away. They all made it disappear. And therefore, nobody bought the book. Nobody read it. Nobody learned about it. And it's still kind of a mystery to a lot of people. But I mean, again, it's not, I get called a sports conspiracy guy, but I didn't make that stuff up. It was right in there in the files. I was just the one who found it.
Something that G and I are very used to and familiar with is as soon as you start to speak on something that maybe not fits the mainstream narrative, that's what the label is, and that's how society recognizes it as. So
yeah, I was going to say, James, though, I was listening to a podcast with Brian earlier, and that Dan Patrick interview, I think you were actually on to talk about legalizing sports gambling.
Yeah, I know. I goofed him. That was great.
And you actually turned the conversation towards.
Yes, I did kind of notice that. And that's what made me think to ask that question, because I was like, okay, this could go somewhere interesting. But they're very crafty at making sure that they keep it in a particular lane that works. And
well, I was pretty amazed I was able to do that to Dan Patrick.
Right.
Because I put out it was like fishing. I put out the bait and the dude took it, and I was able to turn my little 10-minute segment into what I really wanted to talk about.
You wanted it.
I mean, they never had me back, but I still got it out there. So that was the main thing for me.
Right. Right. No, that was awesome.
So I just wanted to run down a few things. Like I was saying right before we started recording, my years as a sports fanatic or nerd were 96, 97 to about 2006, 2007. That was when I was about 6 or 7 to about the time I was 17 or 18. And so one was the Patriots after 9/11. I mean, the Patriots right after 9/11 was just always a little fishy to me. And then the dynasty happened. The Yankees made the World Series that year, although they did lose.
Yeah, but they hit like $1.86 for the series because they had to face Johnson and Schilling that year.
Right. Right. And then the Super Bowl between the Steelers and the Seahawks, I was still a Redskin. I root for the Steelers now, but I know it's all fixed now, and it's more like I just picked the team because of the way they run their business or the attitude of the fans. It's more the culture that I like.
Competent organization, as I like to harp on.
Yeah. But it was basically the polar opposite of being a Redskin fan for all those years, right? So that's why.
Yeah.
But regardless, I mean, back then I was like, this is fixed as hell. Bettis, going out in Detroit, and then the calls that were made. I mean, the Roethlisberger touchdown. I still remember that. That's such a horrible call.
Then you knew that Super Bowl was bad when I forget, it was like 2 years later, it might have been 3 years later, the head of referee from that game, and I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he literally was at the Seahawks training camp and he apologized for that Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And it actually became news. I couldn't believe that it actually got out, but I mean, if that's not a guilty conscience at work, I don't know what is.
Right.
I mean, because otherwise you would just be like, oh, hey, I did my job and tough luck you guys lost. But to be apologized, like, yeah, I really screwed that game up for you guys. Sorry. It's kind of a telling statement.
Yeah, no kidding.
I wonder how many times those zebras had to come to Sean Payton and do that over the years. Well, that's some of the stuff we saw there.
Well, especially the championship game with the Rams and the non-call on the pass interference. And that's right. That's what I like to tell people. I'm like, look, if the referees were doing such a bad job, why didn't those guys get fired?
Right.
If I had a job on national TV that I screwed up as bad as they did, there would be some sort of repercussion, I would think. Yeah, if they didn't get fined, they didn't get suspended, they didn't lose their job. They're still out there officiating NFL games. Well, why is that? My answer is because they did the job that they were instructed to do by the league. So they really didn't do a bad job. It may look bad from your perspective watching at home, but from the NFL's perspective, that was perfect. Good job, guys.
It's unbelievable. Even the talking heads on ESPN, I remember recently were talking about after Sean Payton had stepped away from the Saints, how, there's potential for him to want to go to an organization that he might be able to get those I'm paraphrasing here, but might be able to get those sort of calls moving forward, not being in a small market or with a small market team, so those sorts of things could stop happening to me. I couldn't believe when I was hearing that, those little things you hear differently these days.
Yeah, because you're right. That's a statement that should never be made.
Right.
Because if everything's fair and by the rule book, that's
it
not
wouldn't
even
matter, small
common.
market,
No,
large market,
Right.
anything. Right.
Exactly.
no, not at all.
And then before I get into like my specific notes that I have here, the one other thing that I picked up on just listening to your podcast more recently is, and I don't know why I didn't like pick up on it myself, but all of these strong teams, Houston strong, Boston strong, there hasn't been one that's a loser yet.
No.
That's interesting. You're right.
Yeah. No, that's the coincidence of coincidences.
Yeah, no
You had
kidding.
Vegas strong with the shooting at the Country Music Festival, and their expansion hockey team somehow made it to the Stanley Cup Finals
That year.
which
Yep.
makes no sense. The Houston Astros, despite the fact that they were cheating, stealing signs, made it to the World Series and won the World Series the year they were Houston strong. Again, Boston strong after the Boston Marathon bombing, and both the Red Sox and the Bruins made it to the finals. The Red Sox winning, the Bruins losing, and then, like you said, you had the Saints after Hurricane Katrina before the hashtag thing happened, and you had the Patriots after 9/11, and the Yankees really after 9/11. A lot of people say, well, they lost, but still, they were in the World Series. So, but find one where it didn't happen. That's my question. And it happens. We have disasters all the time. We have shootings, unfortunately, all the time. How come none of these hashtag shrunks, these things have been associated with a losing team? Again, that just coincidence, or is that good business?
Well, I like to say it must be a coincidence. Must be.
The one specific I had to ask you about, being that I'm in Richmond and VCU is kind of a thing around here. The first year that March Madness expanded to the first 4 play-in games, VCU made an unlikely run to the Final Four. Do you have any specific thoughts or intelligence on that?
Well, I think the NCAA is harder to fix in terms of those storylines, put it that way. That doesn't mean they can't do it. I definitely know, NCAA basketball and football games have been fixed by gamblers, especially with these kids not getting paid. It's very easy to get them to shave points and do things you want them to do, especially with the booster influence amongst all these players too. The VCU thing, it's hard to really say that was influenced and forced upon into being. I remember it happening, but I don't remember like the calls in the game or how it might have been manipulated to do so, because the problem with the NCAA, although the NCAA association itself makes a ton of money on March Madness. In fact, that's where they make most of the revenues, March Madness. The individual, the ACCs, the SECs, all the little conferences and stuff, they don't benefit from that sort of thing like they do the pro or the bowl games, I should say, in football. So the VCU thing, I hate to disappoint you, but I really can't say for sure that was forced into being. I mean, I think with everything, I think all things are possible, sure, but it's a harder thing I see happen in college basketball like that than I would say like in the NBA, where I think there's more monetary attachment to those sorts of Cinderella stories.
Right.
But again, I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility again when money's involved.
Right. Yep. What do you got, James?
Well, I'll tell you what. Okay, it's fixed, but what does Dan Snyder have to do to get some things fixed to go his way? I don't understand. Let me take a step back. I'm an unfortunate Washington follower, I should say, more so than a fan these days. At this point, I think G can attest that I follow to actually break more news off the field about them than anything about winning on the field. But I guess my question is, these organizations like Washington, like the Jets, like Detroit, like these organizations that are always seem to be loser organizations or dysfunctional or incompetent from the top down, however you want to put it. What are their roles in this? I know this season we saw quite a few interesting upsets, but what makes and I know you touched on talent, but is there something to organizations that just are continuously losing or continuously perennial losers? Like, are they? Like, it's almost like their role in this story, in this entertainment
Jaguars
song and dance, is to be just bad, and that has, believe it, people can laugh, but I feel that for fan bases that are loyal, Browns and the Bills, and the Bills are good now, but for a long time, it's like those blue collar, hardworking fan bases. And I know Pittsburgh has been good for a while too, so they really don't count. But just what is that? Is there something to that? Is there something more to that, or it's just bad leadership and it's just bad product on the field year in and year out?
I think that's part of it, is the leadership and the ownership being involved, and how directly involved they are and how much they care to be involved. I mean, not all owners really, I think, own teams because they want to win Super Bowls.
Right.
I think some owners own teams because they can use their team as like a tax dodge. I mean, I think there's other reasons to own NFL teams than saying, well, I'm going to own this team and I'm going to make them a championship caliber franchise. I don't think it matters to a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but to some of these owners, I don't think that really matters how well the team does on the field. I think the prestige of owning that team is just another feather in their hat. And it's someplace where, hey, if we're going to have a business meeting, why don't we do it while our team's playing? And hey, look, here I am in my, presidential suite, and check it out. And the game is secondary, if not tertiary. It doesn't really matter to them. And I think, again, too, I think some teams do try. I mean, like the Bears, for example, have been bad for a very long time. Their owner's a 96-year-old woman. I don't think she cares too much. I mean, she knows she's at every game, but I don't think she's involved in the day-to-day operations. And also it falls down to other people within the family, how much they care, how much attention they put into it. Who knows? But I think it does require, to a certain extent, power within the league to also get that league help. And that's what I talk about. Like, people say, why haven't the Cowboys won more? They're America's team. Well, a lot of people don't realize that Jerry Jones doesn't share revenue like all the other NFL owners do. And I think that pisses them off.
Right.
To a big extent. So, they're fine. Okay, the Cowboys made the playoffs. That's good for television. That's good for ratings. That's good for our bottom line there. But we're not going to give Jones and the Cowboys help because he's not giving us help in the money. So the Cowboys completely always fall apart in the playoffs. Now, if the Cowboys were like the Patriots, where Robert Kraft does a lot, with the NFL, helps the NFL build relationships overseas, helps the NFL with the television deals. Well, that matters. That matters to everybody. So maybe the Patriots got a lot of help because of that. The Cowboys don't get any help because of that. And that's the difference between having, 6 Super Bowls and none over the past few years. And I think that has a lot to do with it, is the power within those leagues themselves amongst the owners. Because, I mean, you got to think, too, like in the NBA back in the 80s, how many franchises were really just filler?
Right.
I mean, there was really there was the Bulls, the Celtics, the Lakers, the Pistons, maybe the Knicks, and then a bunch of, Washington Generals playing those 5 Globetrotter teams.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what and do those owners
I feel
complain?
It's still like that for the NBA.
In many ways it is, but do those owners complain? Do they, try harder? I don't know. I don't think I don't think to a lot of them it may not just matter whether they win or lose. It's just
you can see
feather of one in that league,
what you say makes sense. I mean, I feel you can see it. You can see it sometimes. And when you follow the day-to-day of certain organizations like Washington, you just see it. It's like, no, there's no way that when you're getting paid because of TV deals, are paying these guys regardless if you lose. There's no incentives to win. It's not like how soccer has its structured, which I honestly think could work in the league in the NFL.
Oh, I think it would make things seem a lot more legitimate. That's for sure. If you could get regulated to be in the second tier, then I think a lot more motivation would be involved. But at the same time, like I said with Schneider, are the Redskins really his number one priority in life? Yeah. Probably not. Are they the 10th, most important thing in his life? Who knows? But it doesn't seem like it's a main focus for him. It seems like he's screwing around doing other stuff half the time and not even know what's going on in the organization. So
not at all. Absolutely. God.
So you definitely answered that organizations are not striving to win always, but what about players? for the most part, do you think most players are striving to win and that they're being manipulated by coaches or officials most of the time? Or do you think there really are, what percentage of players are compromised? Best guess.
I have no idea.
Right.
I really couldn't throw a guess out there. I mean, I think a lot of players understand, especially with officiating, that some guys get calls and some guys don't, and some teams get calls and some don't. And I think they're very well aware of how that functions and how that can hurt or aid them depending on which side of the coin they wind up being. I mean, I think and you hear it even, and that's why they have to fine them if they talk bad about the officials after the game, because they don't want them coming out every game and saying, you know, we got screwed by the officials out there, because it happens time and time again. But it's interesting. It's a really interesting question, because I mean, you take a guy like, I mean, I could be totally wrong, but like Aaron Rodgers, I think, in my belief, because I unfortunately live in Wisconsin and am subject to the Packers day in, day out here, I think he tanked this last playoff game against the 49ers.
Certainly did look like it.
I think because he was pissed off with the general manager and the rest of the team brass. I think he went out during the season and won the MVP because that was for him. That's for me. I am the MVP of this league, and I went out and did this. And in the playoffs, if I made it to the Super Bowl, won the Super Bowl, yes, Aaron Rodgers would get another ring, but then so would the general manager and all the team brass that I hate, and they'd say, well, we won the Super Bowl. Well, Rodgers would be like, yeah, but I gave that to you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to win the MVP for myself. He took that first drive. He took him right down the field and scored against the 49ers. And probably in his head said, yeah, I could beat these guys. And then said, you know what? Forget it. I'm out here.
Damn.
And I mean, and I could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
But I think there is that within certain players where it is a lot of ego and a lot about me, but not necessarily team and winning. So I think that does play a role. Because, I mean, everybody's different. You know, not all players have the same motivation. You know, some guys take performance enhancing drugs, some don't. You know, but the guys who don't aren't ratting out the guys that do. Why not? Because the guys that don't are probably losing jobs and contract money to the guys that do. So they should be ratting them out. But yet the union somehow keeps everybody together and working for the same supposed goal. But yet they're screwing each other by doing things like that. So it's not, you know, despite all the talk about team and we want to all win and we're out for the ring, I don't think that's really the truth. I think for some guys it is, sure. But for all of them, no, I don't think so.
All right.
Interesting.
Interesting stuff indeed.
It's depressing, isn't it?
Well, you know,
it's
fascinating. It is
for me. It's like I'm convinced that it's fixed, and I'm coming at it from an angle of how much is real. That's what I'm looking for.
That's the thing is,
like
I don't.
How far does this?
I know it's fixed. How much is
like
real?
how compromised are the
why
things?
try as a player?
Yeah.
Well, because I mean, look at professional wrestlers. You know, there's dudes who have careers as professional wrestling as being the heel who always loses. To kind of be the warm-up match. You still get paid. It's still pretty good money, and you're still doing what you love. So why not go do it? I mean, there's, you know, especially like in boxing and mixed martial arts, there are guys who are out there just to get their heads beat in every, you know, night.
Right.
That's kind of their job. They're still a boxer. They still say I'm a, you know, boxer, but they have a record of like 4-82. But that's their job. So, I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, I don't think the NFL, the NBA are as scripted as like professional wrestling by any means.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think every game is fixed. I don't think it needs to be fixed because certain games definitely don't matter. In other games, you pretty much know team A is going to be team B, you know, 999 times out of 1,000. So if we need to fix it and give it a little help here, fine. But for the most part, we can let those games go. I think, you know, it's when you see storylines and stars suddenly emerge, like Joe Burrow this year, where the NFL goes, hey, we're going to jump on the Joe Burrow bandwagon. Well, now we're going to start helping Joe Burrow and the Bengals, and we're going to push them along maybe farther than they should go, because, again, that's going to benefit everybody by making Joe Burrow a star. I think those are the things that happen. But I don't think they sat at the beginning of the season, the NFL owners, and said, we're going to make Joe Burrow a star this year. I don't think that's the way it works. I think as he progressed and got better and started doing the things he did, then they jump on the bandwagon and make things happen.
Right.
Yeah.
So I did want to share your work because, like I said, Brian, I've been really fascinated by your work.
Thank you.
One interview that you've been talking about and you posted on Twitter recently that I'm going to link in the description is this former Dwight Smith player. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Dwight Smith, I mean, he was brought on this Tampa Bay radio station, sports radio station, to talk about the Buccaneers being in the Super Bowl last year. And for whatever reason, which it's kind of baffling, I'd like to talk to the guy. I probably should try to reach out to him. But he basically started talking about how the whole NFL is basically fixed, like I talk about. Yeah. And that games aren't decided on their field. And he actually laughed at the two radio hosts for thinking that they were. And he's like, no, these are decided well off the field. That has nothing to do with the talent out there. It's decided well before we step on the field to play.
And he's legitimately laughing at him, James. He's legitimately laughing at him.
And here's the guy, this is the guy who won the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And he's saying, no, if you think it works that way, you're nuts.
Yeah. And then that was when I got tipped to the fact. He was like, well, I think COVID, this is the perfect year for the host of the Super Bowl to make the Super Bowl because people aren't traveling and all, you know.
That's the real ironic one is the fact that there was a quote Super Bowl curse where no home team, like you said earlier in the show, ever hosted a Super Bowl.
0 for 54.
And then the year of the pandemic, when everybody was forced to stay home, amazingly, the Super Bowl had to stay home. And again, it's now repeated this year with the Rams and their new $5 billion stadium. I mean, that's
coincidences, I tell you, man, those things.
Exactly.
Pre-COVID, 0 for 54, COVID, 2 for 2. That's hilarious. So Brian, you can find a lot of his work, a lot of the stuff that I've read on his website, thefixisin.net. These are 5 proofs. If you just want to like touch on those real quick, Brian, we don't have to read the whole thing, but basically this is what I was already kind of intuitively starting to think that these were fixed. But when I hopped on your website and read just these 5 facts that it was like, I already knew them, but when you read them all together like that, it's like, whew.
Oh yeah. Well, the biggest one really, I mean, we talked about the revenue sharing and the fact that this is entertainment. The biggest one is the law, the legal end of it. And there's no law that prevents a league like the NFL from fixing its own games. And that I think is the biggest mind blower out there. You know, there's 2 laws, and I talk about them on my website, is one's about game shows. You can't fix intellectual contests because there was a big game show scandal back in the 1950s where they were being rigged, like I talk about for sports, for television purposes to make it more exciting for people to tune in and watch. Dramatic. So they outlawed that. But they didn't outlaw sporting contests or physical contests. So you could like still technically fix like American Idol or, you know, Survivor or a lot of other things, but you can't fix Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune. So the other law that exists, which actually Flores and Hugh Jackson now made kind of public, was it's illegal to bribe someone to alter the outcome of a sporting event, which is the Sports Bribery Act, which developed out of all the game fixing occurring in college basketball in the 1950s. But again, if the NFL tells its referees, you know, this is how we want you to do your job, and that's going to alter the outcome of a game, well, they're not being bribed to do it, so it's not breaking the law. So legally, the NFL can fix all the games they want. The NBA can fix all the games they want, and they're not breaking any law because this is entertainment. And the 2 main laws that are on the federal books don't pertain to that. And on top of it, a lot of people say, well, then this would be fraud. But you had somebody like the Jets fan who sued the Patriots over Spygate, lost in court, and the judges confirmed that, look, when you buy a ticket to see a game, if it's an NFL game, all they have to do is play an NFL football game. Doesn't mean certain rules have to be followed. Doesn't mean certain players have to play or play up to their best ability. As long as they play a football game as opposed to a basketball game, they've met their contractual obligations to. So there's nothing stopping the league from doing what I talk about in terms of manipulating all these games. Right. So if you are a multi-billion-dollar business, why wouldn't you do this? Right. It's the best business decision to make is to make games as interesting as you possibly can to get people to tune in because that's where all your money is through television.
Money makes the world go around. So the sidebar here, he's got a few pages on this website. I selected a few of the ones that I liked the most. This is the top 10 all-time fixed games. Obviously, I don't want to go through every single one, but I knew in my heart that Junior winning the race right after his dad died at Daytona. I knew when that happened that was
I'll never forget that.
And Brian mentions it wasn't even a secret. Michael Waltrip said, I'm not going to pass Junior.
Yep.
Yeah. And again, people think, this is a conspiracy theory.
No,
Really?
that was public. That one was
Yeah.
obvious. The Joe Namath one, I mean, you write about it in your book, but if you just want to quickly go over that for anybody who doesn't already know.
Well, Super Bowl III, I think, was like where everybody learned this trick because that game meant so much money. And this actually wasn't even my idea. There's a guy, a former NFL player named Bernie Parrish, wrote a book called They Call It a Game back in the 1970s. And Parrish actually worked for the NFL Players Union for decades. He was really committed to it. But he wrote in his book that he thought Super Bowl III was fixed. And now here's a player who played in the league during that era coming out literally saying, I think that was fixed. And he basically said, well, I thought when CBS and NBC bought into the NFL that they literally bought the league, that they came in and took over and controlled it. And what happened with Super Bowl III is the merger was going on between the AFL and the NFL. And there were more NFL fans in the United States than AFL fans. And they didn't accept the AFL as being like legitimate sports league. They thought it was like second class football, which is amazing because AFL football basically is what we have now today in the NFL. It's all passing and high scoring and craziness like that. And the NFL was the old school defense and running. But anyway, so the argument is the Super Bowl III was rigged to basically justify the merger and show that the AFL was just as good as the NFL was. And because of that outcome, it literally led to the modern day NFL and created billionaires out of all those guys who owned the league at the time.
Yep.
But had the Colts won, it might have been a different story and a different, future for the NFL.
And we talked about the Saints in the Katrina year a little bit earlier, but you had that as your number one overall fixed game.
Oh, yeah. That game was disgusting.
I think, I saw it live and it seemed obviously fixed to me too. But if you want to just say anything about that.
Because, you're supposed to be, I would think, as broadcasters, impartial to a certain extent. And that game was a total New Orleans Saints love fest.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, and the sad thing is the part that bothered me, because my brother is like an electrical lineman and he worked like recovery in New Orleans after the hurricane, rebuilding their infrastructure and all that sort of thing. And they were acting like because the Superdome reopened and the Saints were playing there, the team literally like saved the city of New Orleans. Now, meanwhile, like 5 blocks away from the stadium, people still hadn't had power for like 6 months or a year.
Right.
But no, the Saints saved New Orleans. And that was the first game back in the Superdome. And it was Monday Night Football. And it was just a total joke. I mean, it was all about the Saints. It was all about the Saints.
Right from the pregame.
And and, I think, and especially funny too, I think if I remember right, the Falcons head coach was Jim Mora's son. And Mora was the longtime coach of the Saints, and the son grew up in New Orleans.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so it was all like, here's a game for the Saints, won't everybody be happy? And it was just a Cinderella, fairy tale story that they told that night.
Yep. And then I remember, because like I said, that's right around the time where I was super duper into sports. The Steelers had, I wasn't the only one who was like, that game seemed fixed. So with the Super Bowl being, a lot of people questioning the Super Bowl being fixed the year before, that was the reason why they didn't let the Saints advance all the way to the Super Bowl and why they fell short to the Bears.
Yeah. Well, even in the Saints Super Bowl that they won, their quarterback was Peyton Manning.
Right.
For the Colts. I mean, his dad was Archie Manning, the only quarterback the Saints ever had. So Peyton grew up in Louisiana and he grew up in New Orleans. He was another guy who would be just a perfect guy to tank a game for the Saints.
Yep. And then in Super Bowl 50, he gets handed a W.
And walks off a champion. And I mean, that also seemed like a total rig job with Cam Newton. Look at the fumble that he should have picked up.
Oh my goodness. Like that one. Oh my goodness. And Peyton has such dead arm.
Oh God.
For him to still pull that off. And it was obvious dead arm. I mean, it just was.
Yeah.
What an interesting
But again, that's all story building. That's all great for the league. And again, it's all stuff that they could make happen if they wanted to.
All right.
And that's what sells tickets. That's what got people interested.
I mean, Cam looked right at that ball. I mean, it's some of the stuff that.
Well, and Cam after the game too wouldn't talk. That was the really interesting part. Was the fact that after the game he was just like, nope, and left. which to me made him look almost even more guilty that he just threw that game.
So Brian has a lot of his past interviews on his website as well, fixesin.net/interviews. I did check out a few of these over the last couple of weeks as I was preparing for this. Good stuff, man. Got to just let you know it's really awesome material for anybody who wants to dive further into this.
You don't get any of my crazy Alex Jones interviews though, so that's.
I haven't seen that one yet. I haven't seen.
Well, you can't because you too pulled Alex Jones. He got yanked, so I got yanked along with him.
But what if you go to the InfoWars site, you wouldn't be able to find it on the InfoWars site?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I haven't looked. It doesn't mean that much to me, but I just find it funny.
Yeah, no, he's an entertainer, if nothing else. That's for sure.
Well, one time I went on a show. It's like I went on a show a few times, but one of the times he had me on, apparently he his family knew Lance Armstrong's family, and so as he was bringing me on the show, he went on this anti-Lance Armstrong rant, and I mean he was just going and going, and finally when the producers cut in to me and he said, we're gonna have to push you to the next segment. He's like, Alex just does this sometimes. He just kind of goes on these rants. So if you can hang around for a few extra minutes, that'd be great. Like, yeah, sure, no problem. But yeah, so I mean, he just kind of goes off on his own. It's not totally an act. It's just him.
It's just him. Oh man.
These are the top 10 6 series, seasons, or streaks. There was just a couple on here that I wanted to. You talked about Tim Tebow's 2011 season a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
But yeah, really, it's just these top. Well, really, just this one that I want to hear you go into a little bit more on, because I really felt like that was a rigged job. Could you call it a choke job? I mean, you said Curry's wife tweeted, "I've lost all respect. This is absolutely rigged for money."
I know.
If she's tweeting that out, then I have to believe that it was more coming from the officials than the Warriors.
Well, they've put in there. I mean, Draymond Green got suspended for some reason. Yeah, nobody seems to really totally know why, but got him out of the way.
Cleared it out the way.
And then Steph Curry fouled out that one game, which they never fouls out a star, any star, ever.
Right.
I mean, they basically, again, through officiating, kind of said, "Here you go, LeBron. Here you go, Cleveland.
Right.
Away you go."
Cleveland.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote. I think I'm getting old. I think I wrote a chapter about it in my book, "The Fix Is Still In," about that whole.
Yep.
That whole series.
You did, and The Fix Is Still In goes into some other sports like golf, horse racing, boxing, whereas The Fix Is In just sticks to the 4 main: NHL, MLB, NBA, and NFL, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. I never figured I'd be doing this for 12 years.
Right.
It's scary. Well, I mean, when I wrote The Fix This In, it was like 2009. It came out in 2010. I was like, okay, well, I kind of got that off my chest. I'm done with this. And then I realized there's kind of this void where nobody talks about this stuff. And back then I used to be able to do a lot more radio interviews because you could actually contact people and get on the air. And, the more I dug into it, and that's when I started doing all the FBI digging and stuff like that. But I was like, nobody cares about this stuff, and they should. I mean, guys who have power, like in sports media, I mean, like the Dan Patricks, the Bob Costases, the guys who have been in this for 40 years, I know they know. Or at least I know they know more than they've let on. Even if they say this is a conspiracy, they may not be fully, involved in everything. But I know they've seen stuff. I know they know things that they quote can't talk about. But they should be at the age and the experience level where they should be able to come out and say, "Look, wait a second, this is a bunch of nonsense." I mean, especially like Costas with Michael Jordan and his gambling thing. I mean, he knows that Jordan got kicked out of that league for gambling. He knows it, but he doesn't come out and talk about it. But he should, because he's the kind of guy who could break this stuff up, who could really, force it into the mainstream, get people talking about it, and expose the lack of integrity that these leagues have and how much that they've covered up over the years. But I guess they're too much company men, or they've made too much money over the years, or maybe they even have non-disclosure agreements. I don't even know. But there's a lot I think they know that they won't talk about, and that's sad. because I shouldn't be the one doing this. It should be those guys.
It's never those guys though.
know.
From my from where we stand, it's never the talking heads with the platform. It's never the folks with the followers. It doesn't seem it's not going to be those folks. I mean, these folks, I feel, to even get in those positions are heavily vetted and heavily they know where they stand and they know what they have to do. A lot of those folks, it's already established for most of those folks.
No, you're right, James. That is the way it is.
Yeah,
really, but it's sad.
Unfortunately,
that's the part, yeah, I mean, like I say, that's the part that kills me. Is it shouldn't be that way. I mean, like back in the day, I don't know if you guys knew Howard Cosell, but I mean, Howard Cosell, he was willing to say stuff and write stuff that other sports writers didn't. Mm-hmm. But he was like the end of it. It was like as he got pushed out or aged out, whichever way you want to look at it, the new era was a totally different type, and it was more not necessarily. It was either former athletes who became broadcasters, or it was, you hate to say it, but like jock sniffers who took over,
right,
and just were willing
Adam
to go along
Schefters.
who were just willing to go along with the league because it meant a paycheck.
Right.
And it just totally transformed the way sports were covered, and not for the good. It just made it more of an entertainment factory.
Of course. I mean, investigative journalism and investigative reporting was a big thing, I mean, even ESPN, for a time had their hand and was interested in that, but they've pushed that to the backside, and many other publications have. Well,
because they became invested in the league.
Right.
The NFL can't give the ESPN can't give the NFL $1.2 billion a year, then stick a bunch of investigative reporters on them.
Of course.
And I mean, people don't even think about that. The NFL or ESPN pays like $100 million every week for Monday Night Football. $100 million just for the broadcast rights. That's not paying the announcers, the camera guys, or any of the other stuff. That's just to the NFL so we can show these games. And how many, $100 million does Disney? How many $100 million movies does Disney produce a year?
Right.
Like 10? But yet they put out 17 NFL games for $100 million a piece.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane.
But that goes to show you the power of the league too. Mm-hmm. I mean, even with some of these salacious things coming out of Washington and all the race stuff coming from Flores and the coaching stuff that always hit, they always seem to dodging those bullets like the Matrix in there.
Well, because it's the only thing you can watch live on television anymore, or you have to watch live. Right. Everything else you can DVR, watch on demand, see it 2 weeks from now. It doesn't matter. But sports you have to consume while they're happening, or you're behind the curve.
Right.
And you'll find, you can't record the Super Bowl and watch it a week later because somebody's going to tell you what happened.
Exactly.
And once the Rams won or whatever, then it doesn't really matter if you watch the game or not. Not really.
Right.
So that's why they have so much power and so much pull in the television markets.
And those new TV deals show that too.
Oh God, yeah.
Astronomical.
So James and I, not only are we not afraid to talk about taboo or far out subjects, and I was kind of looking forward to this one, the magnets. Everybody, when you bring that up, it's just like, oh, that's crazy talk. But when you start to realize that you're not allowed to keep an NBA basketball and you're not allowed to keep the footballs that the kickers kick, but you can keep the other ones. Those two facts alone make it like, well, something weird's going on. And then when you watch some of these videos that you have on this page here,
that other video disappeared again.
Yes, but now you've got a link to it though. You've got a link to it. That's the Justin Tucker, his first ever missed extra point, and that does look crazy the way
that some of these things pull so sharply and so abruptly, and I mean it's just so many weird.
And then this Jacksonville kick, I remember seeing that one live. The announcer's like, oh no, and then the ball it's already going right, it's curving right, and then it just curves back left. I don't think that physics does that. I don't know, maybe I
think a lot of those things don't get talked about enough.
But the hockey puck ones are the ones that I'm not going to play them. Just go to his website, thefixesin.net/magnets, and see them for yourself, because the hockey puck ones there's got to be a magnet. Like there's no other logical explanation for what's going on there.
Well, the only reason that started that whole page really is I had a guy, and this was years ago, who used to be an NBA ball boy for the Bulls. And he was the one who told me, he goes, there's magnets in the rims and in the balls. And I said, what? And he said, no, there's it's in there, and it's supposedly to trigger the 24-second clock. So like when the ball goes through the net, it triggers the shot clock. And he said, he basically said, yeah, but it does more than that. And so he was, it was his, comments to me was basically like, yeah, they could kind of pull shots in or repel shots if they want to. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's some serious, crazy conspiracy talk stuff going on there. And then kind of the more you look at stuff like this, the more you start going, well, maybe that's not crazy conspiracy stuff. Maybe they have that ability, because when you think about it, how much magnetism power would be required to pull a basketball that's bouncing around the rim in or repel it out if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't take as much as potentially altering a field goal. I don't know how much pull these magnets could potentially have, but it's something to consider given the technology that's apparently available and out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The way that I've seen some of these balls pull with field goals, extra points.
I just find it very interesting that the K ball, you called it on here, the K ball, the kicker ball. They call them,
you're
not allowed to take those, but you can take the regular ones. That's just very telling ones. To me. I don't know why, that just seems like a very overlooked fact there.
Yeah. It's a special ball. Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Well, the thing too is that I don't know if on my website, I think I put there the thing about the gloves and the football, the catching that somebody developed.
The sticky.
Yeah, where it's the magnets like compel the ball to stick to your hand, and they show the guy making all these one-handed catches with this magnetized ball and glove thing, and makes you wonder why. Look at this. Why couldn't the NFL use that? Because you see these guys, and granted their hands are 5 times bigger than mine, but they make some crazy catches that don't seem possible. Just look like it's no problem. They just like reach up and here's the football in my hand. But
that Odell Beckham catch from a couple years back.
Yeah,
3 fingers.
Yeah, that was crazy.
3 fingers.
So these are just some weird tweets that Brian put on here. One of them is that Steph Curry's wife tweet, but Larry Johnson has been kind of vocal, the former Chiefs running back.
Where has he still been active? I haven't seen. I followed him very, very heavily. I don't. He seemed to have disappeared. Which I knew it was a matter of time before that. I hope he's okay, of course, and it's nothing. It's just. But no, I haven't. He's not been active, has he?
No, he just, like you said, I followed him too, because he would tweet some stuff that related to sports
stuff
that was crazy. And then same thing, he vanished.
And
I'd like to know what happened too. He's another guy I should probably try to find and talk to, but I'm lazy.
He really, Larry Johnson really goes there, and he goes to some corners that G and I have explored in certain topics and stuff, but he meshes a lot of that with what's going on in sports, and he was a very good follow, and he's been quiet for some time now. I hope everything's okay with him.
Did you want to talk a little bit more about, this is the censorship page, and then there's the sports non-reporting, which I feel like those 2 pages are very related. But did you want to go a little bit more into that? Because I did read those 2 pages, and it does seem like not only you, but pretty much anybody that talks on these things, there's only a certain amount of reach that you talk about. There's a difference between the government limiting your speech and the corporations limiting your speech. The corporations are allowed to.
Well, yeah, and that's just it. And I always talk about this. I write about sports, and in the grand scheme, who cares? They're sports. But how many other people who write about more important things and do research and find out information that's really valuable can't get their story out because nobody will let them get their story out. Like I said earlier, if it happens in sports, but it's not on ESPN, does anybody know what happens? It doesn't seem like it. And so what I've encountered, one of the big things, I think one of the bigger learning lessons, besides what I talked about before when I was kind of snubbed with that book, Larceny Games, I wrote an article, and again, another long story short, with this guy Lance Williams, who co-wrote the book Game of Shadows about Barry Bonds and Balco and the steroids. And I had gotten information about potentially fixed Major League Baseball game, which should have been huge news, considering it supposedly hasn't happened in 100 years. And Lance and I did all this investigative work. And we were working for this place called the Center for Investigative Reporting, which is a pretty prominent place. And we finally put this article together and everything. And then the center went out to other places to find someone to publish it for them, basically. And ESPN turned down the article twice. Now, here's the story we fully researched, put out by the Center for Investigative Reporting, and the ESPN said, no, we don't want it. And we're talking about, we were talking about potentially fixed baseball games, the fact that Major League Baseball security somehow got a local sheriff's department to hold the family at gunpoint and keep them held captive, essentially, until Major League Baseball investigators could arrive to interrogate the one guy who was connected to this whole story and all that. I mean, it was just incredible stuff. And ESPN was like, no, we don't want that. And then we went to like 6 or 7 different other outlets. Nobody wanted it. It took literally a year for us to get Sports Illustrated to run that story. And so, I mean, and all this effort. So it took like 18 months, I think, from the time, maybe 2 years from the time it began until the time it was finally published. And I made $1,000 for that.
Wow.
So how much money do you make doing investigative reporting? You tell me, because let me tell you, 2 years worth of work and a lot of trouble to get it published. And I made like $500 a year. So, why would you do this? Or how could you do this for a living? If you're not backed by an ESPN or somebody who will pay you a daily salary to go out and do this stuff, there's no money in it. Why would I, I've written my books, but I can only spend so much time doing this stuff on the side because you can't make a living doing it. Right. And so therefore it won't get done.
Was that the same article that was posted in the New York Post?
What's that?
Was that the same article that did get posted in the New York Post?
No.
Because you said you had one article that did go viral.
That was the one that came out of my Larceny Games book in the FBI files. Because I wrote, part of it was when the files said that members of the New York Knicks were shaving points as a favor to their cocaine dealer.
Right, in the 80s,
and the New York Post picked up on that. And that was funny, too, because that one went viral thanks to the New York Post. But it didn't go to ESPN. ESPN was the only outlet that wouldn't cover it. Again, ESPN wouldn't cover it, which I found hilarious because, it was everywhere. CNN somehow found my phone number and called my house at the time. Darren Rovell, who I don't know if you know who he is, he was like emailing me like, I need to know more about this. And I had a lot of people coming out of the woodwork to contact me and find me about this stuff. And then again, nobody else did anything with it. Despite that. But the funny thing is you can Google it. You could just Google, New York Knicks, cocaine dealer game fix. And you see all these different postings for it. And not one of them is ESPN because they refuse to cover it. Because they're the broadcast partners of the NBA. Mm-hmm. Despite it being a 40-year-old story, they wouldn't cover it.
This is a little off topic, but I meant to bring it up earlier. Deshaun Watson going into this year. Now, don't get me wrong. I know the NFL harbors a lot of criminals and there's a lot of domestic abuse players out there, but this one seemed a little fishy, didn't it? Like this guy's always been squeaky clean. And then all of a sudden he's got some contract disputes with the Texans and now 20 women are accusing him of sexual assault.
Yeah, that's a story. That's one of those, I don't know. I mean, you hate to, think that those 22 women aren't credible. But at the same time, could really one guy go through 22 different massage artists at the same time and do the same thing to all of them? I mean, wouldn't you gotten the clue after 10 or something? I don't know.
If it was like organic, if like he really was a problem, wouldn't one of them come out before now? Like all 20 at the same time? Isn't that a little fishy? Like a little bit?
Yeah. But at the same time, there's some weirdos out there too. Yeah. So I could very well be that's him. I don't want to
say he definitely didn't, but it does seem really strange that the Texans were, and then he goes the whole year without playing. Like something really went down. There's really some bad blood going on between
there is. This one seems a little different because this one seems like if there is something else going on, the NFL really reached in their bag for this one. If of course, if there is something else going on,
Well, I can't. As I say, the other thing that's odd is I don't know if another player's ever lost a year in the way he lost a year of his career.
In the prime. I mean, you're talking about one of the best, maybe the best quarterback in the league, arguably. Missing the whole year.
He wasn't suspended. He wasn't suspended.
No,
he hasn't been fined.
Nope.
Still with the team.
He's not on the exemption list. None of that.
So it's a
just
really
not
odd
playing
situation. Yeah. It's a very odd one.
Yeah, no kidding. That's all I've got, Brian. I really appreciate you coming on. James, did you have anything else that you wanted to bring up while we got him?
No, not really. This has been awesome. I mean, as someone who loves football and loves sports, it's hard being me in the sense of someone who really peels back the onion on a lot of things, even the stuff that, it's one of those things where it's like two things can be true. And I still don't know how to feel about that yet, because I know, we know what we know, and I don't pretend not to, but at the same token, football brings me enjoyment, unless you're a Washington fan, then it doesn't. But other than that, no, this has been awesome. This has been great. I mean, it is so thought provoking, and at the end of the day, one thing that we do here on this show, Brian, is we try to focus on truth. We try to focus on the things that a lot of folks don't want to touch on or talk to. So,
taboo topics.
Taboo topics is what we like to call it. So this is
needs
right
to be talked about.
A lot. Absolutely.
I really do. I mean, and like I said, with this stuff, again, I could be wrong with 95% of the stuff I say in terms of what was fixed or not fixed. I mean, I admit I could be totally wrong because I don't have concrete evidence of it. But
to that point, though, I do. I mean, I know you say you don't have concrete evidence, but in my opinion, and as I've already said, I'm coming at it from an angle of I'm already on board with kind of you and where you're coming from. I believe most of it's fixed, but I'm looking at it at an angle of being interested in how much of it is real. Like what effort are these players putting in that is real? What is determining their pay grade? Those sorts of questions are the ones that really intrigue me, knowing that it definitely is fixed, or at least in my opinion.
Well, I think, and what I was going to get to is it comes down to the integrity aspect of it all. Because they always talk about, we have to protect the shield like in the NFL, or, we have to worry about the integrity of the games because, people are gambling on them and that sort of thing. And that's the thing is, if I'm wrong, again, with vast majority of what I think is fixed, okay, fine. But if I'm even right with a little bit, then the integrity of it all is totally in question because all the NFL had to do is fix one game intentionally for their own reasons to destroy any integrity they had. I mean, that's all it takes is one game. And I think every fan has seen one game, be it in the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, whatever, that made you go, whoa, wait a second. How the heck did that happen? And that's all you needed. Because from that point on, then the integrity of everything's, I think fair game to be questioned. And once you do start digging into these things and seeing all these little side stories and little things that occur within the league, then you have to question the integrity of it. Yeah, you have to question the integrity of it all because that's when it starts really pressing down on them and presses down on their money-making abilities. But you have to ask those questions. You have to be willing to dig into it, and most people aren't.
Right. Yep, for sure. But so I guess my final question / thought to get out of you is, what degree? I mean, I know you said that you don't have concrete evidence, but if you're speculating, if you're just brainstorming, so to speak, what do you believe the degree to which it is legitimate?
That's a good question. I think every sport's been compromised.
I believe that too. But why are the players
boxing, NASCAR, tennis, soccer? You pick your sport. There's been cheating in it for sure. There's been corruption in it for sure.
Absolutely. And
especially in professional sports in the United States, there's definitely been games fixed or compromised or manipulated, whichever word you want to use, for the league's own purposes. I myself am certain of that. Again, to the degree, what level?
I agree. Yeah,
it's hard to say, but all it has to do is be that much, and again, it questions the integrity of it all.
So how about this question? What percentage of professional athletes do you think believe that the league they play in is 100% legit? Do you think all of them know it's compromised, or is there a certain percentage that truly believe that they're playing a legit game?
I think only the most naive would think it's totally legit. I mean, again, they may not think it's necessarily fixed, but I think from their vantage point, they've seen enough in terms of even just little things like drug usage, the doctor saying you're okay to play when you're really not okay to play. I think there's a lot of things that the players have seen that make them know that this is a business and that they are a cog in this machine. And so, they have to do whatever they have to do to make the most money they can out of that short career. And again, I'm sure willing to compromise themselves to do that, to keep making money. Because again, I mean, and I don't blame them for it either. I mean, if I could do a job and I could do it and I'm only gonna be able to do it for 3 years, like an NFL running back usually has a career that's, I think, 3 years long. But I could make $3 million in that 3 years. Yeah, I might be willing to do whatever it takes to make sure I make that $3 million. Because I know afterwards, now that I've focused my whole life on football, afterwards, I may never make a dime from football again, and I got to go get a real job. Well, yeah, I might be willing to compromise myself for that short period of time to make sure it happens.
Right.
It's depressing, but true.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, when I was like, okay, it's all fixed. But then it's like, okay, if these players are realizing it's all fixed, what motivates them other than the money? I get the money. But it seems like if it was all fixed, money wouldn't be enough to motivate a lot of these guys to go out there and do what they do.
But I think, most athletes, the really good athletes that make it to the professional level have been corrupted since childhood. I really do. I mean, I think, if you show athletic talent in school at an early age, even middle school, you're treated differently.
Right.
And in high school, you're treated even more differently. And then you have all these, people from colleges coming in who are throwing money at you, throwing this at you, get you to come to their college and play in their program. You're compromised your integrity right there by them too. So then you get into the college program, and then it's a whole different life. You live a totally different life as a college athlete than you do as a regular collegiate, student. And you're compromised and you're corrupted within there. And then here comes the NFL or the NBA or one of these other leagues. I mean, all you've known is corruption in a very real sense since you were 12 years old. So, does it really then shock you when you're in the NFL and somebody may tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you need to fix this game?
Yeah, I was going to say,
I don't know, because
you just perform your best until you get told not to.
Yeah, but I mean, you've been, again, compromised the whole way, and you realize this is how the system works. And again, in many ways, it's working to your benefit, but you're also sacrificing part of yourself along the way, and you may not realize it until it's too late.
That's good stuff. Thank you again, Brian. This has been awesome.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely.
Remember to check out his website, thefixisin.net. A lot of great resources, a lot of great information on there. And I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks, Brian.
Sir. Peace.
Thank you.